What is time and why does it flow from the past to the future? Every person has asked this question at least once in their life. But what if time is immobile and, in fact, it is matter that moves through it, just as it does through space? If so, then why does this movement always occur only in one direction? Science defines time as the fourth dimension of the space-time continuum. From this point of view, the properties of each dimension are equal. In any of them, matter, including us as beings composed of it, can move as to one side, as to the other side, except for time. But is this really the case? Let's look at this video. Now it is moving in the direction that is familiar to us. The consciousness of each person captured on this film perceives the flow of time just as we do, from the past to the future. But what will happen to the perception of these people when we pause the film? That is, stop them in time. In this frozen moment, nothing has changed in their perception. They are still confident that they are moving forward in time. And now let's run the film in the opposite direction. Now it is obvious to us that these people are moving backwards in time, but their consciousness does not perceive this change, and the people on the film still think that they are moving from the past to the future. But from our point of view, from the point of view of an observer from another coordinate system, what seems to them to be the future is their past, and what they perceive as the past is their future. From this, we can conclude that our personal feeling does not reflect the real direction in which we move through time. What seems to us to be a continuous movement in one direction may actually be a completely arbitrary movement, just we are not able to perceive these changes. Moreover, the people on the film are not just moving backwards in time. From our point of view, they almost perfectly predict the future, knowing it as well as we know our past. In fact, from the point of view of quantum mechanics, there is absolutely no difference between the past and the future at the micro level. The properties of matter do not depend on the direction of movement in time, just as there is no difference between the direction of movement in other dimensions of the space-time continuum. Moreover, in reality there is no past or future, there is only the present, and in this case, the idea of what was in the past and what may be in the future exists only in our consciousness. Our brain makes conclusions about what happened or will happen based on its current state. That is, on the form and structure it has at this particular moment in time. But if the physical properties of matter do not depend on the direction of time, then from the point of view of analytical or computational capabilities, the same amount of them is required, both in the case of predicting the past and predicting the future. Moreover, in this case, nothing prevents doing this with equal success for both the past and the future. But why then do we predict our past so accurately and cope so poorly with the future? There must be a very good reason for this. And there is. If the direction of time is symmetrical at the micro level, then at the macro level, at which our bodies exist, the directions of time have a fundamental difference. And it is determined by the equilibrium within our universe, or scientifically entropy. Let's look at the glass of liquid. Initially, the water molecules inside are distributed evenly. Such a system is in equilibrium, and in this state almost nothing happens to it. But if you add salt crystals to the system, there will be places where there are more salt molecules and less water molecules. That is, the equilibrium inside the glass will be disturbed. From this moment, the system will begin to restore equilibrium. The salt and water molecules will tend to areas where there are fewer of them, And this process will last until the state of equilibrium is restored in the glass, where the water and salt molecules will be equally distributed inside it. The same is true for everything in our universe. Moving from the past to the future, the level of equilibrium in it increases, and in the opposite direction it decreases. Physicists call the tendency of the universe to equilibrium, or in other words, to increase entropy, the arrow of time. It is this property that makes the fundamental difference between the directions of movement in time in the macro world. If this is the only difference, then it must be the reason why we see time as a flow from the past to the future, and not the other way around. The increase of equilibrium in the system entails another consequence. The complexity of the system decreases. That is, if after adding salt, there were different shapes of crystals and different densities of places in the glass, which would require a lot of information to describe. Then over time, such structures became less, until all the contents of the glass turned into a homogeneous solution, the properties and structure of which can be very accurately described by a few words. The same thing happens with the universe. When moving from the past to the future, from a non-equilibrium state to an equilibrium one, the complexity of the universe decreases. But this property of the arrow of time confronts the properties of living matter. Moving from the past to the future, living matter strives not only to preserve its complexity, but also to increase its volume in the universe by reproducing. That is, the properties of living matter are opposite to the properties of the arrow of time. One of the phenomena in which the arrow of time manifests itself is competition in living nature. Competing for resources in the struggle for survival, some organisms destroy others, thereby increasing the entropy of the universe. On Earth, where the environmental conditions are favorable for living matter most of the time, competition has become the main factor of pressure from the arrow of time. Thus, the universe uses extremely complex strategies of some living organisms to destroy others, thereby reducing the total volume of living matter and making its influence on the movement towards equilibrium insignificant. A side effect of competition is the fact that the surviving part of living matter is forced to become more complex. To survive, it needs to resist the complex strategies of competitors. This requires complex behavior, and complex behavior requires a complex structure. As a result, the winners in the competition of living nature accelerated in their complexity, overtaking the natural course of events, in which they would only face inanimate nature. In such conditions, the preservation of the tendency to complexity when moving to the future meets more and more resistance, as incredibly complex systems compete. To preserve and increase their complexity in such conditions, a combination of many unlikely circumstances is required, the random coincidence of which is practically impossible. Therefore, living organisms need tools to influence and respond to the environment. At the same time, a random course of events is unable to make modern organisms more complex, and that means the tendency of living matter to simplify when moving to the past does not meet any resistance even with a random course of events. Therefore, for living matter, The ability to change events in the future by making them non-random and favorable for complexity is much more important than the ability to influence the past. The nervous system is a tool for making decisions, allowing its owner to influence events. Before making a decision in the present, the nervous system must receive information about both the past and the future. If the nervous system has no information about the past, then even perfect knowledge of the future does not give the opportunity to make a rational decision in the present, because for such a nervous system, any knowledge is a set of uninterpretable images. While the lack of information about the future, even with excellent knowledge of the past, makes any decision in the present no more useful than random. The same rules work when moving to the past. Based on the fact that for living matter, the ability to influence the future is much more important than the ability to influence the past, it is logical to assume that in the evolutionary perspective, nervous systems that better predict the future than the past should win. But why is everything the opposite in reality? The nervous systems of animals, including ours, cope well with calculating the past and are very bad at coping with the future. The answer lies in the previously voiced tendency of living matter to simplify when moving to the past. In order to have the ability to predict something, one must preserve a certain amount of information for analysis. When moving from the past to the future, the human nervous system analyzes the surrounding reality and saves the acquired experience in the form of new neural connections, thereby becoming more complex. This does not contradict the tendency of living matter to complicate when moving to the future, since in reality there is neither past nor future. For making a conscious decision, the brain must predict them. The first action it does, based on the shape of neural connections and the current state of reality, is to predict the past, and then it interpolates the obtained information and based on it, predicts the future. In this way, the brain gets data for making a decision. Such a model of the nervous system works. However, in terms of efficiency, it is much weaker than a model in which the nervous system would not interpolate the past in an attempt to predict the future, but initially had such a structure that would predict the future as well as the past. But the formation of such an nervous system faces an insurmountable obstacle. When moving from the future to the past, living matter tends to simplify. But, in order to preserve information for subsequent analysis, the system must become more complex. Because of this fundamental contradiction, the accumulation of experience becomes impossible. And if it is impossible to accumulate experience, then it is impossible to predict events based on it. Time is one of the 4 dimensions in which our bodies live. Its difference from other dimensions is that, moving to the future, the universe becomes simpler, and living matter becomes more complex. The nervous systems of animals evolved as a tool for making decisions that affect the future, because living matter finds it harder to resist the arrow of time in this direction than in the direction of the past. Our nervous system first predicts the past. Second, using the obtained information, predicts the future. And third, having information about the past and future, makes a decision. It is because predicting the past always precedes predicting the future that we perceive time as moving from the past to the future. But the fact that we perceive time in this way is not proof that in reality, we and the entire universe move only in this direction. In fact, this movement can be absolutely arbitrary. But we cannot feel the changes, just as people on the video do not feel in which direction the film is spinning. Perception, including ours, is just a tool, thanks to which some living organisms have gained an advantage over others. This tool does not have to be an accurate reflection of reality. It just has to work better than the competitors, helping living matter in the endless confrontation with entropy and the arrow of time.